Deconverted man here. Happy New Year. So, it's time to reflect on the past year or something like that, apparently. And for me, that means thinking about my own thoughts in a public way on being a skeptic. I just set up a live thing where I brought up this election stuff that's going on and said, what's going on? This is weird stuff. And it is odd seeming, but is that me being a skeptic, or is that me giving into cognitive dissonance or something like it, pattern seeking, perhaps? I have been listening to a lot of people, but I've been listening to one side more than the other, possibly. And that can sway your opinion. You can sway how your mind thinks about things. So to be a skeptic, how do you do that in a way that ensures that you are being skeptical about the right things and not being so skeptical that you morph reality into something that it isn't? And some do take skepticism to be that you doubt so much that you even doubt reality itself. And I don't think that there's very much value in doing that. The initial thought experiment, you run it once, and I think that's good enough. Yes, this reality could all be illusion, but it doesn't really matter. We still have to deal with it. So, yes, lots of people have come forward and testified, and this guy that seemed like an expert had something to say. I looked at his channel, and I was like, I don't know now. Because there's some question marks I have about this person now. And even though he's got degrees and such like this, it doesn't really necessarily mean anything. Is what he's saying have any merit? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he's just saying a lot of things that sound impressive. Maybe he wants money or fame from it. Maybe this, maybe that, maybe a lot of things. So, how to recognize that you're making a conspiracy theory? Whenever you take information that is known and start forming a narrative around it, then you've made something up. So ages ago, there was that clock kid who brought this metal box to school with some clock parts in it. And they thought it was a bomb, and then it got to the news, and then he wound up getting invited to the White House, and people were like, this isn't a clock. He had just a bunch of nonsense in there, and and everyone was trying to make sense of the story. They were trying to put a narrative around the information we did have. It happened to be that his dad was a political person in some country, and so I had developed a narrative that's like, well, the kid already had a troubled in school. This was known, so that this was something that his dad put him up to, knowing that, and then called the press and knew that because he was Muslim, that would do something politically, and then this whole narrative that just came from my own imagination, and that's probably what I was doing in the voting stuff. Maybe not. So I have to be skeptical of my own ideas, and that's hard to do sometimes because you think you're right. Well, how could I be wrong? I've been right in the past so many times, but if I'm forming a narrative, then that's too far. So here's the facts at hand, X, and that's it. That's all I know. Is that worth looking into? Maybe, maybe not. It's not really anything I can do one way or the other, honestly. I mean, it's not my job to look into it. per se, and all I'm going to get is secondhand information. I'm not going to be the one to look at the stuff firsthand or investigate it. Where would I even begin to do that? So because of that, I have to be skeptical, which doesn't mean that it's false, but doesn't mean it's true. And so what does it mean to be skeptical? And I come back to that. When I analyze an argument, for example, I just did in the previous video, and I talked to the guy and I said, look, you used the word code in a different way in almost every instance. And he came back saying, I didn't use code as a saying it was a language and then saying it was some other thing. What was it he said exactly? But he came back suggesting in a way that I had said something that I didn't say. So that's kind of odd. Let's see. Oh, he said that his argument doesn't transition from code to language, which I didn't suggest that it did. I just said that he used the word code in different ways in different parts of his argument, which is very clear to me that he's doing that. I don't know how to make it clear to him. Hey, John, how's it going? So how does one be a skeptic? What is that, right? And so for this, his argument's about intelligent design, which you could believe in and not believe it's a god. You might think like it's an alien or whatever. And if I granted that, I would have to say that the designer is kind of dumb, because the way that it set it up isn't a very good way. To get to where we are now, you don't even know that that's an outcome that you're going to get to by just seeding the chemicals at the start, because the rest of it's completely, on its own after that. And you have to rely on the filtering mechanism of death to get the randomness that this is to where we are. And without that filtering mechanism, you have this big giant question mark of how could this be just random? And this is what creationist ID proponents tend to forget or leave out, however you want to put that it's not just random. There is a filter going on that's filtering this information, these data points through. So the chemicals that can connect to each other do, and those that can't don't. And so the ones that did connect, that stayed connected, did, and then more connected and whatever, and then you have a more and more complex thing over time. And the ones that work keep working. The ones that don't work don't. And there you go. There's your filtering mechanism. And over time, that makes things more and more complicated as things go on. But they ignore the filtering mechanism and say it's completely random. And they say, well, how could that be? Well, nobody's claiming it's random except you. So that's why you're getting it wrong. But with this code thing, he's getting the word code to mean different things in different places in his argument. And he's saying, I don't understand what his argument is. And I just said, no, you don't understand that you made an equivocation. It's not my fault. It's not my problem. But that I didn't agree with your conclusion is why you object to what I'm saying. You can't see that it's a fallacy because you believe in the conclusion. And it is almost as if they don't understand when I say we've got to be skeptical of your conclusion, what that means. And I've explained it before, but I thought, well, at the end of the year, it's worth talking about again. Being skeptical doesn't mean that it is not true. It doesn't mean it is true either. It means I am not having any conclusion one way or the other. It says I'm remaining uh, in doubt. So, I've got different things here that I do, So I've got this little guy here, and I could make a statement about it. I could say that it's battery operated. That might be true, it might be false, but without any reason. Well, the social barrier, the social contract we have with each other is that you assume that I'm telling you the truth unless you have reason to doubt. In this case, I'm making an example, so that is a reason to doubt what I'm saying. And so for that reason, you might indeed conclude that this is not battery operated, and you'd be correct. There's nowhere to put batteries. And even if you did put a battery in there, there doesn't appear anything that it would do. It doesn't appear to be a thing that could be. It could be battery operated. I don't see anywhere I can put batteries, but it doesn't mean it's not. But of course, well, if I can do, it can do that. I didn't know I could do that. Well, you discover something new all the time. So I had no idea it could squeak. That's great. I love it. So I've discovered something new about my toy I didn't know just now. But you could be skeptical that that's a true reaction. It is a true reaction. I had no idea. That's great. But the point is, of course, you have the information at hand. And then you have the statements about that information, and then you have the ideas about that, and you go, what does it mean to doubt? What does it mean, or what does it mean to be skeptical? It is because my argument is so bad that even if the conclusion is true, because we're using just logic, we don't get to say the conclusion is false. We have to say, I'm going to doubt the conclusion. So I could make a very bad argument. Lobsters exist. I'm not a lobster, therefore I have a green thing. And I do have a green thing, but that has nothing to do with what I just said. So the argument's completely faulty in numerous ways. Bonus points if you figure it out. But the conclusion is true. So my light is on. So any argument I give where my light is on as the conclusion can be as flawed as it can. Premise one, it's raining outside. If it's raining outside, then my light is not on. It is raining, so my light must be on. Well, it's completely incoherent. There's no association causation. There's formatting errors. My light is on, but because of logic and how it functions, you and I would both have to be skeptical of the conclusion, even though we recognize that in this case the light is in fact on. It's just that within the formula of logic, we have to be skeptical of the conclusion. Because sometimes, and many times, we don't get to see the light, or we don't get to see the green thing. So we don't get to see the conclusion for ourselves to know whether it's true or not. And if we did, we wouldn't even need the argument. If we could see the car, we don't need an argument about the car. And so many atheists and agnostics and skeptics alike have said, show me God. What's the evidence for God? So here's God. There's your evidence for God. That's God. You go, okay, well, why is this God? Or how is this God? Well, I named it God. Well, that's not what I meant, though. Well, what do we mean by God? And then that's up to the person that's claiming there is a God in the first place to explain. If this is what they meant by God, then yeah. But I can show you it and say, this is God. And you go, okay, that's God, because you named it God. But what attributes does it have? It's solid, it's white, it's made of plastic, it's in the shape of an octopus, it's, it's hollow inside, or at least it seems to be hollow inside. It was made by a 3D printer. I don't know if you could tell that just by looking, but maybe you could. But they say that this is not God with a capital G, because that God can't be seen. So when you ask me to show you God, I can't show it to you because it's not visible. It's not invisible either. It's just not a thing I can show you. So why do you keep asking me for the thing that I don't have? So you're claiming that the thing that you're calling God is invisible, or at least it's neither visible nor invisible. It's just something we can't see. How do you know that it's even a thing? Like, you're not. So we're not using sight. So we're using. So there's other senses. There's other testing methods. So how do we get to the truth? How do we figure out if what you're saying even means anything? And so if all we have is the argument, we don't have the object itself. And I said, and here's God, and you didn't see that I held up my little plastic octopus that I named God, then all you would have is the argument to go on. So if the argument was premise 1, lobsters exist, premise 2, if lobsters don't exist, then I have then I have a God, and so lobsters do exist, so I do have a God. And I said, and there you go, there's my proof. You would say that argument is so broken, so ludicrous, so ridiculous, that even if it's true that you have a God, I have to be skeptical of that. And I said, but I do have a God. You were wrong. You go, well, that's fine. But I wasn't saying you didn't have God. I was saying I'm skeptical that you have God. And there's a difference. And there's a big difference between saying there is no God, there is no thing there at all, versus I just doubt that there's a thing there. Because one is a positive certainty that I'm claiming, and the other is an ambiguity. I'm not saying it isn't, I'm not saying it is, I'm saying I remain in doubt either way. I'm suspending judgment. That's what skeptic means, at least to me. And when I see that I myself am not doing that, thanks to people to pointing that out in different ways, I have to step back and be honest and say, oh, right, because I too am susceptible to the mental facilities that I have in pattern recognition, in story construction, in wanting there to be a narrative about these situations. And maybe I'm not paying as much attention to the left talking people as I am the right talking people lately, and maybe that's influencing me, and I'm not keeping track of it, so maybe I should, because I want to be balanced. I don't want to go one way or the other because people are saying that. I want to be open to all the information and then try to sort that out and make sense of it. And maybe in the end, I can't make any sense of it. And then I have to be skeptical of all of it. But at least I tried. So, Sean wants his bonus points. Non-secret argument. The conclusion continues. Yes, that you get your bonus points, John. Very good. Yeah, it is very much non sequitur. There's other fallacies, but it at any rate, you only need one to doubt the conclusion of an argument. So going back to what that guy, I just made a video on, where he's like, code means code, and it's not an analogy, and you can't say it's an analogy because I'm telling you we're going to use it as if it's not an analogy, and so more rules. Let's just keep piling on rules for you to follow, and you can't ever get to a different conclusion. And so I said, but your whole thing is hypothetical. It's like you don't even understand what hypothetical is. The whole point of a hypothetical is that I get to throw away the hypothetical part out of hand. Because it's hypothetical. That's why it's a weak argument. That's why people try for the modus ponens or the modus teleos or the disjunctive syllogism instead. Of course, many theological arguments could be fixed by making them hypothetical. If there's a beginning of the universe in the way that I would need there to be a beginning of the universe, and if that beginning of the universe happened to be God, then the beginning of the universe happens to be God. But you wouldn't even need that. You just say, if there's a God, then there's a God. Forget the universe bit. We don't need any of that. If it exists, then it exists. Okay, well, duh. But also, yes. But we could say, well, who cares if anything? If we need, is that even a thing that's possible? And sometimes we don't know, myself included. And I rely on you to point that out. And sometimes when people point it out, I go, no, you're wrong. I'm right. How dare you point out that I'm seeing a conspiracy where there is no conspiracy, because there is something going on, and maybe there is, I don't know, but no, I don't know that there is something going on. I don't know that there isn't anything going on. Is it worth looking into? I don't know. I mean, might as well. I don't know. I'm not in charge of that stuff. But, if there's something, maybe, but be skeptical. And how do I do that when I, too, am a pattern-seeking, narrative-seeking creature? It's hard. It's difficult. Because it requires research. It requires deep thought. And it requires other people to ask you the critical questions about your own beliefs. And that's not comfortable. It's not a good feeling when somebody says you could be wrong. I want to be wrong in the sense that I know that means I get to learn something new, but it doesn't feel good. And so it's a change in the mind of trying to train my brain to be accepting of being wrong so that I can be the best skeptic that I can be, whatever that means, which I also doubt, I guess. But only once, because then I'm fine. So, is that how to be a skeptic? Well, it's my version of it, I suppose. And maybe you have your own version of being a skeptic. Or maybe you don't even like the terminology skeptic. Maybe you prefer a different terminology or a different label or what have you. And we all have these categories that we want to kind of put ourselves in for various reasons. And sometimes people don't want to be in a category, which of course is a category of people that don't want to be in categories. So you can't escape it. But we have to be careful because there's many ideas out there and many of them aren't true. And figuring out which ones aren't true is very hard. So does that mean you have to doubt everything at all times? Well, to some extent, maybe. But not everything. And how much do I have to doubt? Well, doubt to a reasonable limit, but where's that reasonable limit? And where do you put that reasonable limit? That's really hard to figure out. And I don't know that I'm getting there, but hopefully I am. I have been a skeptic for 10 years, so hopefully I'm beginning to learn to do this pretty darn well. But there's always more to learn. And with your help, hopefully I'll learn that. Anyways, so thanks for listening. Please give me feedback. What do you think it is to be a skeptic? How do you do that? How do you be skeptical of things? And what is the thing that you hold most dear? And have you challenged that belief or idea lately? If not, maybe it's time to do that. Remember, unless and until we have empirical evidence or repeatable tests or a valid and sound argument, we should be skeptical of the conclusions.